Welcome to Money News. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us today is Jonathan Macey, professor of corporate law, corporate finance, and securities at Yale University. He's the author of the brand new book, The Death of Corporate Reputation, How Integrity Has Been Destroyed on Wall Street. And Professor Macey, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, is the erosion in reputation that you discuss in your book the cause of the financial crisis or a byproduct?
I think that it's a cause, actually, in the sense that people didn't realize how little firms, particularly the credit rating agencies, cared about their reputations, and so they kept trusting them, and this trust led to reliance and disastrous consequences as people loaded up on AAA securities, particularly CDOs, that weren't worth very much.
Mm-hmm. So was it too much regulation, too little regulation, or flawed regulation that sort of fostered that atmosphere?
Well, regulation had a lot to do with it. People started looking at things like investment banks saying that they were members of SIPC, members of the FDIC, that they were regulated by the FDIC, or regulated by the SEC, and people put their trust in some pretty unsavory businesses that the government allowed to run around with a sort of vague imprimatur of regulatory oversight and accountability.
Mm-hmm. John, do businesses on Wall Street really care about their reputations anymore?
Well, they care about the bottom line, that's for sure, Kathleen. And there was a time when you had to care about your reputation or your bottom line would suffer. The problem we're in right now is that that's really no longer the case, that these credit rating agencies, big investment banks, commercial banks have suffered a massive erosion in their reputations, but it really either hasn't affected their bottom lines or the people running these businesses believe that it has not affected their bottom lines.
Does any segment on Wall Street have a good reputation?
Well, that's a very good question. I hadn't thought about it quite from that angle. There are a lot of segments on Wall Street that have good reputation with particular constituents. Clients tend to like their lawyers, for example, or they choose different lawyers. But in terms of having a solid reputation with the public, with what we commonly refer to as as Main Street, those folks outside of the Wall Street bubble, I don't think there are any standouts that have, really stellar reputations. Maybe the federal courts are still, generally, not corrupt and viewed pretty well, but you have to stretch pretty far to find somebody to fit that category, Kathleen.
And what, if anything, does the Securities and Exchange Commission have to do with all of this?
Well, as I say, the SEC touts themselves as being an effective organization in protecting investors. And to the extent that people actually believe that, we've seen with a number of big scandals, most notably, of course, the Bernie Madoff scandal, that this is really a false promise. So the SEC has an incentive, unfortunately, to kind of oversell their capacity for protecting Main Street investors from Wall Street investments. And it's also the case that when these scandals occur, they actually help the SEC in terms of creating new demand, new jobs, new funding. So we're in a bit of a conflict of interest situation with respect to the relationship between SEC and Wall Street firms.
Mm-hmm. How can we restore trust and integrity to Wall Street?
Well, I think that in order to begin the long road to restoring trust, I think it's important to remember two things. Number one, as your question suggests, there was a time when people really did trust their bankers, trust credit rating agencies, and such trust was important, and it wasn't crazy to trust these folks. And the second thing is, when businesses begin to realize that it's important to their bottom line once again, then things will change in a hurry. But unfortunately, I don't believe we've quite reached that point as of yet.
Mm-hmm. So where should ordinary people, or Main Street, if you will, invest their money if they cannot trust Wall Street?
Well, if you're a rational person, when you make an investment, you got to think one of three things. You got to think either you're smarter than the other guy across the table, which is pretty unlikely. or you've got to think you're being protected by regulation, which I think is a pipe dream, or you've got to think that you're protected because the company you're doing business with really cares about you and really cares about its own reputation. Right now, I think the place to put one's money is in index funds, in very transparent investment interests whose performance tracks some broad market index like the S&P 500 or the Russell 5000 or the Dow, and is very, very easy to monitor. I think that's what a smart investor will do in today's environment. You'll get the market return and you won't get ripped off.
Last question for you, John. We've had a hacked AP Twitter feed spark a market plunge. There are questions about Bloomberg terminal security, and cybercrime continues to grow as a threat. What do you make of all these prying eyes and vulnerability to one's online information?
Well, I think we're going through a whole new age when it comes to the idea of privacy, and we're really in an adjustment phase that people have transitioned to a web-based, an internet, a cloud environment, and people really don't know. Even the experts, in my view, Kathleen, really don't know how much privacy anyone can really reasonably expect. So I think it's a very, very scary prospect, and I think it could lead to some significant turmoil in the marketplace.
All right. Again, the book is called The Death of Corporate Reputation: How Integrity Has Been Destroyed on Wall Street. Professor Jonathan Macey, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching Money News.